Right. Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our latest meeting. Got some interesting presentations this morning. If we could save questions until after each presentation, that'd be great. And I'm sure we'll have time at the end if people want to have a further chat about things. But just one sort of thing to flag up. I'm not sure whether you've seen it, but my colleague Andy Jones is doing one of the Getty webinars on the 5th of December. So I'd encourage you to sign up for that if you're interested. That's looking at the more, I think, the developer side of things. I suppose you could say it's a companion presentation to the webinar I did back in September, but probably slicker. Right, I shall now hand over to Sam from Knowledge Integration, who's going to be talking to us about QGIS and arches. So over to you, Sam.
Thank you. Right. So hello everyone. I'm Samuel. I'm a software developer for Knowledge Integration. Can everyone see the screen? I presume so, but I can't see your response.
Yeah. Cool.
Thank you. So firstly, apologies for my voice if it cuts out at any point. Being ill at this time of year is not fun. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about a Arches QGIS plugin that I've been kind of working on, and sort of to kick the ball rolling on this topic. So for the very few people in here that won't know what QGIS is, I'll just briefly explain. So it's a geographic information system, a GIS. So it allows users to edit spatial data, analyze, etc. It supports 3 types of layers: raster, which is for digital maps. It's an area of pixels. The main one we're going to be talking about here is the vector data, which consists of your geospatial points, polygons, lines, as well as the further nested multi-polygons, etc., etc. And finally, mesh layers as well. It also supports your industry standard formats, web services, and is the main competitor of ArcGIS Pro, or at least one of them. Often people will go for ArcGIS because it looks more professional. It's developed by Esri, which is a big name, but QGIS it can be more flexible and customizable due to the plugins. It's very community driven. But often people can say that they find the UI complicated, or just the general experience complicated if they're used to Arc Pro or any of the Esri ArcGIS software. So the inspiration for a QGIS ArcGIS plugin, it's been around the community for a while. People have often talked about the need. It's been in high demand for ages. Mainly because there's an ArcGIS Pro plugin for ArcGIS that was developed by Historic England and Farallon, and it basically allows you to connect to your ArcGIS project through Arc Pro, and then create either new ArcGIS resources using layers that you've got in there, or edit existing ArcGIS resources using the spatial views functionality. So you can connect your database layer, your spatial view database layer, into Arc Pro, or in this sense QGIS, and then you can edit ArcGIS resources through that. So ArcGIS and QGIS overall, it makes sense because both are obviously free and open source. They have the same license, and that kind of fits with the ArcGIS ethos of everything to be open, very community driven. It makes sense in that way. They're also both written in Python, which is quite handy. But yeah, of course, they're both very community driven in the form of their development. Or anyone can make a post on the forum for ArcGIS, as I'm sure you're all very well aware. You can make bug reports, etc. And the same is for QGIS. So this plugin, it's very, very early. So originally it was going to be, originally it was for the previous date for the UK user group. I think I'd only been working on it for a couple of weeks at that point, and I wanted just something to be able to be shown, that sort of a skeleton, say this isn't meant to be a finished product. It's meant to start the idea of QGIS being able to be used with arches. So yeah, as I say here, it's really very early in development. Around 2 months of work have been put into it. Again, it's experimental, so it's not currently in the QGIS repo of the plugin repo. So normally in QGIS, you can access community plugins that have been submitted to the QGIS repo. You can click on the plugins, manage and install, and then search for any plugin there. Hopefully, when it's more stable, I'd love for this plugin to be in there so that you don't have to go through GitHub and download it and then manually install it into your QGIS plugins directory. But yeah, so as it's still early in development, I really don't recommend you use it with any live Arches implementations or any data that's important. But I do recommend at the end of this, if people would love to check it out, perhaps install it for their QGIS, connect it to a development server and just have a play with it, because that's essentially what this is aiming to be. I'm not presenting to you a finished product by any means. I want to get that ball rolling, and I've made quite a bit of progress, but this is meant to be a collaborative project that members of the community can get involved, whether they want to help with the development or just suggest some features. That would be really nice. So I'm now going to tread on some scary grounds and demo a live demo of this plugin. So just for reference, I've got myself a demo Arches environment here. For anyone interested, it shows not all, but a lot of the pubs in the UK that I can find online. And what I've done is I've exported this as a spatial view. So it's connected to my QGIS environment here, as you can see. So the Arches plugin can be found through the plugins here, or if it's frequently used, it can be shown with a little icon here. So when we open it up, it's currently got a tabbed layout. Whether this remains, who knows? I was at one point thinking of separating them into one UI for the connection, one for the create resource, and one for edit. But currently it's tabbed because I think it puts it all in one nice area. So what we've got is the create resource and the edit resource pages. Currently they're all disabled because we haven't made a connection to our Arches server. So if we quickly do that, hit the connect. Now this uses the Arches API to use the username and password provided. Now what you'll need to do before using this plugin, I should have mentioned before. So it uses an OAuth token that you register an application in your Arches environment. You can find the documentation on that, or I can link it. And then that will generate a client ID that you need to put into your settings.py file. So when that's in there, this connection will use the username and password to grab that client ID, and it will get you an access token. And with that access token, you can access the Arches API through that. So now you can see that both these tabs are now enabled, and we can go ahead with whatever work that someone might like to do. So I'll quickly demonstrate both of the functions here. So first, the create resource tab. Our first drop down is the Arches resource models. So when you hit that connect to Arches button, it fetches all the graphs that you've got in Arches, but it only fetches the ones that have got a GeoJSON node and ones that are published and enabled. So here I've got my pubs in the UK that you can see, and I've also got a test model. So we'll hit the test model. And now the features that you can upload is currently a drop down as well. And you can see that it's only only one can be selected. So I'll mention later on that some of the improvements or additions that I'd like to make. This is one of them, that you can only select one. It would be great to be able to select multiple, like a checkbox system. So if we just hit the polygon test, before I click add, I'll just mention this hide Postgres layers. So of course, we load our spatial view, which is a Postgres layer. Now that shows up here. I couldn't figure out a nice, easy way to figure out, well, to let QGIS know which spatial view layer is yours. So for now, I've just gone ahead with the hide Postgres layers button. So now if we hit add, it'll come up with a create resource dialog. It'll say that we want to submit one polygon because there's one polygon in this layer here. When we hit create, it'll hopefully create a resource. So we've got a nice text box here. Unfortunately, this isn't a URL. Again, something that would be great, or even be a URL that you could then again hit and it would just direct you straight. But for this demo, I'm going to have to copy and paste. If we go ahead, we'll see that this this polygon that I can show you is this one over Morrison's, has now been submitted into Arches. It's an empty resource that you can then go ahead and add any further data you want. But of course, QGIS, the plugin, is only really for submitting that geometry. So if we go ahead with the edit section now, we can go ahead and hit the edit resource tab. Now it'll tell us that it's connected to Arches, but you need to select a resource from the map, an Arches resource from the map. So we'll first need to select the spatial view layer, and then we can zoom in and we can just select any. So I'll select this one here. And that will fill in this table, the attribute table, with data from your spatial view that you created. So I added the name, the local authority, just those two values. If you didn't, then it would just, etc. It wouldn't fill that. You get the picture. What we can then do again is we can select a feature. So if I select the point test, we can add or replace the geometry found in this Arches resource with that feature. So if we go ahead and add it, again, the add geometries dialog will pop up. We can hit add. Now there isn't a text box here to tell you that it's worked. So that's something that I'd love to add, or even have a dialog pop up that tells you it's been created. But what we can do for now is we can just copy this resource UUID. And if we go to the location data, we can see that the original point is there, but now two new points that these were my this was my layer in QGIS. This has now been submitted to Arches. And just to prove that, the point test is somewhere. Well, if anything, it's a nice indication that these are the point tests. Of course, the spatial view updates as you update resources in Arches. So this is now updated on the spatial view in QGIS. If we go ahead and instead replace it, then refresh this, we should obviously see, of course, that our original point is gone, and now we're just left with the 2 points from QGIS, from the QGIS layer. So that is the main functionality of the plugin. It's quite basic, but it does those features as intended. What we can do is we can hit log out, and now this will it will clear everything, so you can log in with a new user, for example. And now I just want to quickly show the some of the permissions that are in this plugin. So only those users that have the resource editor permission, as stated, as configured in the admin page, only those with that permission can use the plugin. So I've got a user for this just called Graph Editor. And if we try connect with that, it'll tell you that it doesn't have permission to create resources, and thus the plugin cannot be used. So this prevents unauthorized users from using the plugin. If I have another user that's just got the resource editor permission. So if I use that, we can use the plugin. Everything looks normal. But if I decide to create a polygon, if I decide to create a resource with this, go ahead and add, everything looks normal. But what you will expect, and what should happen, fingers crossed, is that it's created but as a provisional edit. So then an admin will go ahead and approve said edits. And finally, one thing that I can quickly demo too, if I log out. What was that called? Of course, you can also hide, you can prevent certain users from editing nodes. So this this user I've got should be, I think, it doesn't have permission to edit the geometry data in the pubs in the UK resource model. So if we go ahead and try and create this resource, it will then tell you that the user doesn't have the permission to do it, so it hasn't been created. And this works exactly the same for edit resource. It'll try send the data, but it's not permitted to, so it'll stop there. So yeah, that is the plugin. It uses the Arches API for basically everything. It fetches the client ID to make the connection, uses an access token, fetches the graphs, and then fetches the it communicates with the Arches resources based on the spatial data, or creates a brand new one based on the graph UUID. So we can go ahead with that, and I'll just quickly go back to the final few slides I've got. So it functions quite well, if I do say so myself. Of course, there are still things that I it needs adding. I've separated this into UI improvements that I've got, as well as the functional sort of back-end improvements. So general UI tweaks. I think that some of the dialogues could be, made a bit more dynamic with sizing, font sizes, etc. I'd like to add a legacy ID option to the create resource, because if you are, for instance, migrating data manually from a different database, and you're migrating those geometries, you might want to keep the legacy ID when you create that brand new resource. So that's probably quite a nice addition, and it can differentiate between what you've just created. Of course, allow the selection of multiple layers when you edit and create resources. That would be great. For the moment, you can only do one. I think a tab for logging and debugging stuff when it goes wrong, that would be very nice as well. And it could just be tucked after the edit resources tab. And then finally, sort of removing those text boxes saying that a resource has been created, and use a new dialog that says, congrats, you've made an Arches resource, or Arches resource has been successfully made. Here's the URL, go and look at it. Some of the functional improvements, the access token hasn't got a refresh, so it doesn't refresh if the time limit has been exceeded. That's something that I haven't had time to work on yet, but that's on the plan. Some further work on node permissions. I think you can use one of the APIs to see whether a node can be written to. That could just be a good sort of first layer to approach. Now, the geometry conversion is an interesting thing, because in QGIS, multi-point layers aren't stored as multi-point and then each point in that. They're just all the points with multi-point type. And I would have assumed that if you decided to create a layer which is multi-point, it would push to Arches with one multi-type and then all the points within that. But it's the way that QGIS organizes this. That's not how it works. Same with multi-polygon. So I don't know if you saw when I created a polygon resource, it automatically showed up as multi-polygon. So some internal conversion would be good, so that it does that. Multiple arches versions support would be nice. This is mainly for so that the plugin can be backwards compatible, as well as compatible with the newest arches versions. So for instance, in my head, it works like when you connect to arches, not only will it fetch the user information, but it also fetch the arches version. And then if the API happens to change, or happens to change further down the line, or is different in an old version, then it could recognize that and still be functional, still work for older arches versions. And then finally, this is probably an edge case, but implement some functionality for if a graph happens to have more than one geometry node group, as at the moment, it will only fetch one GeoJSON node. In the UI, this probably could look like some sort of alert message. If you select a graph, there could be a further box that says which GeoJSON node group would you like to send this to. I say this is an edge case because I don't know how many people or how many resource models will include more than one geometry node group, but it's very useful to think about and probably have. And yeah, that's the end of the presentation and demo. If you've got any questions, feel free to hit me with them now, or if you think of a question later, then I can be contacted through email or Slack. The QGIS plugin is currently on GitHub with the link there. And yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Samuel. That's very interesting work that you've been doing. Yes, we've got a question. Oh, we had a question. Should I just open up? Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask Samuel? Well, whilst you're thinking about that, I've got a question I'd like to ask Samuel, kind of alluding to it a little bit earlier. One of the things that I would like to be able to do is be able to, when searching for information, if I've got like a group of records in Arches, to take those information and put it into GIS. But also do the opposite. We very often get requests for information based on shape files that people are presenting us. There'll be multiple sites, and we have to then pull that information and put it into Arches. I was just wondering what your thoughts on that were.
Yeah, I really like the idea of having the plugin have sort of push and pull features from Arches to Arches. That would be really nice, and using the bulk importer would also be a good feature for the future. So yeah, those two are really good suggestions, and I'll write them down.
Thank you. Anybody else got any questions or thoughts?
I believe there has been posted in the chat as well.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do you want to? So I didn't see that.
It's more of a just the inside note and note for Sam more than a question.
All right. Yeah, we have use for multiple geometry node groups in Mariner.
Okay.
Yes, Mariner is a system which Historic England are in the process of developing for maritime heritage in England. So that would be quite useful. Thank you for that, Phil.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Well, I'll let you have a think. So should we move on to our next presentation? A slight change of order. So I'd like to welcome Helen. and Helen's going to be talking on fish climate hazard vocabulary and climate hazard recording page in Arches for HERs. Thank you, Helen.
Hi guys, thanks for having me join. And thanks, Sam, for that. That was really interesting. I used to live in New York, so I did spend most of your presentation trying to identify all the pubs that I was looking at, but I did pay attention too. I'm coming from the heritage side. My work is looking at climate change and heritage, and I'm not a software developer at all. So Phil will be answering all technical questions if there are any. And I'll just share my screen and talk about the project that we're working on. So this is a project between Historic England and UCL, University College London in London, the Institute for Sustainable Heritage, which is where I'm based. And we're collaborating. It's a funded project just for 6 months until mid-March to do a knowledge exchange to develop a standardized climate change hazard vocabulary for cultural heritage. Now, I probably don't need to say that climate change is bad, and it's got lots of impacts on cultural heritage, both in terms of natural hazards like flooding and wildfires, but also in the way that we look at the historic landscape. So, for example, in 2018, the record-breaking drought led to a lot of discovery of new archaeological sites across the UK. And so we need to kind of think more about how we can incorporate what climate change is doing to the natural and historic landscape into kind of software that we have right now. In cultural heritage, basically, there's not one list out there for what are climate change hazards. There's actually many lists. Lots of them are conflicting, and there's lots of conflation of terminology between the ideas of impact, hazards, and threat. And I'll give you some definitions in a moment. So basically, what we're trying to do is standardize the way we talk about climate change so that we can talk to each other, and that aids research and management if we're all using the same terms. So this project is creating a method to organize and define climate hazards, and then creating a list of climate change hazards that aligns with the IPCC. And the IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So that's the UN's kind of science body, and they put out these big reports every 6 years that kind of set the kind of field for climate change. And we're really trying to align heritage with climate change science. So the project has multiple objectives, but the kind of main one is that we're creating some kind of climate change recording page that's going to be integrated into Arches for HER software platform. So because this is working between Historic England, we're looking at how we can get kind of climate change recording into Arches. And part of this is also creating a FISH list. So FISH is the Forum for Information Standards on Heritage. A lot of that terminology structures the way that Arches has been developed for HERs, and we're going to create a climate hazard list. So the project is undergoing. We're finalizing the list at the end of January, and then the recording mechanisms for Arches will be kind of end of February. The project only runs to mid-March. It's quite short. We don't have anything technical to show you today because we're kind of in the phase where we're workshopping the list and starting the kind of Arches model that we're developing. So hopefully results coming soon. So we're kind of introducing the project, and any feedback or any kind of collaboration is very welcome. So I'll just quickly kind of give you our definitions because it's quite important about what we're actually doing because the scale of the project is quite defined. So a climate impact driver, this is something set by IPCC. So this is what the kind of experts, the international climate scientists talk about kind of climate change. They talk about climate impact drivers, and these are kind of climate conditions that directly affect society or ecosystems. But hazards, which is what we're talking about today, which is climate change hazards, are the potential occurrence of any natural or human-induced physical event. So these are the things that we kind of think about when we talk about climate change: wildfires, sea level rise, increasing rain, drought, etc. But the actual impacts on heritage, which are the kind of realized risks of the hazard, so maybe surface erosion or kind of structural instability, we're not defining those in our list. There's a need probably for those to have a vocabulary, but we're really looking at kind of climate change hazards. So kind of in underwater archaeology, if we have our little diver and he goes down to a shipwreck and he notices lots of impacts on the shipwreck, like barnacles or corrosion or sediment. I mean, we're not so interested in describing those, but what we are interested in is describing the climate change hazards that are causing those. So kind of just changing in wave action, changing in ocean currents, etc., and then connecting them to what's happening in terms of the kind of larger climate system. So how that's changing with ocean temperatures, ocean salinity, etc. So we're creating a vocabulary for climate impact drivers from the IPCC, and they were creating a vocabulary for hazards for heritage. Now, there's lots of confusion in heritage often about this, so we're kind of hoping to provide some kind of structure for how this works. So we've got a list. I'm just showing you a screenshot of it now. It's being workshopped right now, and we have kind of our main hazards, and we also have kind of key related hazards that are connected. This is being workshopped with the Heritage Adaptation Group. The Heritage Adaptation Group is the kind of national heritage organisations for Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, and England. So Historic England as well as Historic Environment Scotland, National Trust, etc. We're workshopping this list on Thursday with them, and then we're going to agree this list in January. And then this will become the vocabulary that kind of creates our thesaurus. And then this will be integrated into Arches, and what we're trying to build is a climate module. So kind of functioning similar to the consultation module for kind of Arches for HER, the climate module will allow users to create areas that contain climate hazards and then link those to the sites that are going to be impacted. So the user will be able to see all the sites that fall within a certain area and then link to that instance of the hazard and define a relationship between the sites and the hazards. Basically, most of the data that we look at with climate change hazards is geospatial in its origin. This is an example of data I've created looking at precipitation change in kind of 1 by 1 kilometer polygons, but lots of places produce basically shape files or versions of GeoJSON projects that go into your GIS, and we want to be able to link between this data and the kind of heritage sites that are impacted. But the page that we're going to create is going to be more than that, in that we want to also kind of have a free text recording box so people can kind of add in descriptions and linking to kind of other sites that are important in that area, etc. So we're still working on what the headings is going to be for that module. A lot of this is still to be determined, but this is kind of the current idea. And we'll develop this with kind of an internal instance of Arches and then put it out. And I imagine it will take some time before it's actually integrated into Arches for HER because of the kind of changes with Arches 7 that are ongoing. Now, we are talking about climate hazards specifically right now, but what we're trying to create is basically a climate change module in Arches, because climate hazards is only one part of kind of climate change. So when we talk about climate risk and we're trying to assess future risk for heritage in England, we also got to consider other aspects of risk, which are vulnerability, exposure, and response. So while this project is only defining hazards, we want to kind of future-proof work by creating kind of a structure where other kind of ideas, other modules could be added into that. So ideas of vulnerability or exposure could be added in. For example, if areas have flood defenses that are built and that changes the risk of other sites, for example, they're now protected, we want to kind of build, in the future, we could add in kind of a response module that would kind of create those areas and link them to the relevant sites and kind of decrease risk. So we're focusing very much just on the first aspect, on climate hazards, but the idea is that kind of going forward and other projects beyond the scale of this project could add in to kind of these kind of climate hazard module and to kind of a more holistic version of climate risk. Now, a lot of the things that we're doing here, because we're creating a fish list, lots of the other fish lists that exist already, for example, materials or asset types or kind of age ranges, can be integrated into our climate risk assessment. So very much kind of standardizing climate hazard vocabulary is linked to kind of the other standardization of terminology that we already have. And hopefully will allow for kind of the first instance of any kind of climate change recording to be linked to the historic environment, which currently we don't have in any kind of historic environment software, even beyond Arches. So this has been a bit of a kind of a whistle stop tour with what we're trying to do, because as I said, it's still in progress. Hopefully we can kind of come back when it's all created and show you how it works. We will be publishing the list of terms probably February, March, and the project wraps up around then. So there will also be a final report, which we can send round to the user group. So that's a brief introduction to what we're trying to do, and happy to take any climate change questions if necessary.
Yeah, thank you, Helen. That's very interesting. Yes, so does anybody have any questions?
I don't have questions, but I suppose the approach that we're taking with this is, we could create a climate change branch and add it to all the models if we wanted to, but that's probably not the best way of doing it. So the way that we are approaching this is to create a new resource model, which will have all those various branches on there, including hazard. And then we envisage that in the same way that you can create an application area in a consultation, and then you go and there's your polygon, and then you hit the button and it shows you all the assets that fall within that application area, and then you can just go, oh yeah, that one, and associate the area with the thing. That's how we envisage the climate hazard approach working, that you can say this hazard could have an impact on these assets, and then you can create that relationship straight away. And that can be, obviously, you can create that either from the monument or the asset to the hazard, or you can create the hazard and then associate it with all the things that could be affected. So that's the approach that we are, well, I'm certainly championing. I know that I think Dennis envisaged more of a branch approach, but I think that's slightly more problematic, shall we say. But yeah, this is it's all new, and as Helen said, this is something that we're going to have to bite the bullet on, and we're going to have to get to grips with. So, you know, as usual with the Archers, we're over egging the pudding from the start, because, you know, why wouldn't you? So yeah, well, that's what we're going to do. We're going to build something that hopefully will be used, and you never know, there might be opportunities to auto generate hazards from IPCC databases or whatever, and we could have an API and all that funky WYSIWYG stuff if we wanted to. But yeah, it's just it's quite exciting, really.
Thank you, Phil. I suppose this is deviating slightly, but when you're doing this, you're potentially creating a model that could be used for other threats. I was thinking like heritage crime, that sort of thing as well.
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
I was going to suggest the same thing.
You could easily sort of like tweak it, clone it, and tweak it, and make the vocabulary sensible for other things. But you know, mainly it's to do with climate change in the first instance. But yes, certainly we could go down that route and say, right, okay, well, let's have a threats module that we can have a climate version of, and have a, you know, heritage crime version of.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those slightly political things, whether you want something separate so you can flag that issue, rather than have something that's, you know, a subset of just a general threat kind of model. It's one of those things, you know, it's the audience that you're wanting to sometimes present that information to can affect that. But yes, no, I think that's interesting. You know, it is something that we do need to be increasingly mindful of, certainly within the HER world. And one of the things that, you know, same, you know, we've been doing a lot of work as an organisation about heritage crime. So something like that, I think, would be quite a useful tool for some of our other, you know, colleagues to use. Yes, Matthew.
Yep, sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say, further to what you were just saying about the possibility of extending it, it could be that there's a sort of many-to-one sort of situation where you've got the climate model, and then you could create other models for other sorts of threats, but then the monument or heritage asset could have a single risk branch that then can be associated to multiple threats, and it could be
absolutely, Matt. Yeah, so you'd have a risk or a threat branch, and then that's where you'd go in and you'd create a new hazard, or you'd create a new heritage crime risk. Or
so then you could see
sort of a resource instance link.
You could see it at a glance, you know, all the potential ways that it could be impacted by multiple factors. I mean, I suppose that reduces the kind of bloat on the heritage assets end of things, but potentially might increase it on the number of resource models side of things, depending on how worried you are about having a long list of resource models. So it's something to think about. But
I just see the kind of need in some ways to keep the climate change separate from general threat, although related perhaps in the software thing. It's partially because of the nature of the data with climate change hazard data, in that there's so much more uncertainty, and there's different timescales, and the kind of things you want to incorporate in terms of the data and the metadata, in terms of which climate scenario you're looking at, what timeline you're looking at, what uncertainty you have with the data, is slightly different than I imagine the data sets we have for heritage risk. Of course, there's an uncertainty in that too. But I think your recording mechanisms may be slightly different. But yeah, maybe it makes sense to have lots of heritage threat modules, unfortunately.
One interesting thing that's come out of the work that we've been doing on Mariner is the effects of climate change on paleo landscapes, for example, and the ability to record those things. And this, this may be one way that we can do that as well. I think is Phil, what's his name, the Doggerland guy. I need to have a chat with him about it, but he's quite interested to see whether or not we could use this model to actually say, right, yeah, okay, between 10,000 BC and 5,000 BC, this was what, these were the climate hazards then. So it's not just something that we could use for, now and the actual threat thing, but also for modeling the past, potentially.
No, that's a really good point, Phil. Got some questions. Jasmine, would you like to ask your question?
Hi, yes, thank you. This is my first session, so thank you, Stuart, for the invitation, and apologies if this is a naive question, not having attended previous ones. But I work with a consultancy that does a lot of work with the Environment Agency on coastal regions, and this is something we do a lot of work with, is mitigating against coastal erosion and flooding. But obviously we would usually mitigate risk to archaeological assets or heritage assets through the standard field work, and we're also trying to improve our net zero sort of efforts. And I wondered if you had any thoughts about how this could help maybe target that sort of mitigation and input it at an earlier stage as well, at modelling stage, to from a design side. If there's a sort of forecast of where the risk might be to, and I know you said the organic deposits, that's what I work especially with, especially the coastal regions, like you said, Phil, hit home. So
yeah, and forecasting is it's not necessarily my forte, that kind of thing, but I'm sure yes, potentially it could be used for that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of the research we're doing here at UCL is about climate risk modeling, like how we model future climate risk for cultural heritage, and it's obviously quite complicated. Hazards is just one piece of the things like mitigation, and it's much harder to bring that into this kind of, the methods that we're looking at. But starting with the kind of most basic element, it's because we can define it quite clearly and we can build something that works quite quickly. And that allows us to start having the conversation about climate change and heritage. And so we can start talking about, okay, great, yes, actually, we want to be able to link this to mitigation efforts that we have, or link it to casework that we're doing. And so we suddenly we're creating that network, we're creating the terminology. And so we can start doing those kind of instances of different aspects and link them together. So absolutely, that's something that could be expanded to do, but we've deliberately started with climate hazards because it's the simplest in many ways to define.
Yeah, the one issue we have from the modelling point of view that is a bit strange is that the CRM, which obviously underpins Arches, doesn't allow you to do things that haven't happened yet. You can't model things that haven't happened. You can only model things that have happened. And you can't even model things that were intended to happen. So, Napoleon's tunnel under the Channel. We know he had a plan to build a tunnel under the Channel, but you can't create a record for that because it never happened. You can create a record for the picture of the plan for the tunnel, but you can't. So you can't. The CRM won't allow you to do that. So we might need to find an ontology that allows us to actually semantically do that. Azade's got something to say about that.
Yes,
I'm sure.
Professor. Yeah, I wanted to write, but it doesn't let me write. Sorry, I'm in India now, and I have my camera off just to have a connection going. I went to one of CRM's experts meeting 5-6 years ago as I was making a branch for risk assessment for EMENA project using Arches, and there's all aware of the lack of CRM in recording that anything that hasn't happened for the future things. And there was a talk then that they're going to think about it, and we've proposed a few new ontologies for the risk assessment for this missing ontology, but nothing, I don't think anything happened. So maybe that's something that we can, as a group, propose again and see if they're going to add any new classes and properties for risk and threats.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's a particularly hard wall to keep bashing your head against, though. That's the only problem with the SIG as a day, as you know, as anyone who's dealt with them know. They are, particularly Martin, is quite set in his ways and won't change much, because as far as he's concerned, the CRM does what it needs to do. But that's not to say that we can't find an ontology that plugs into the CRM that we could also add in. I mean, we've got multiple ontologies in Archers anyway, the linked art one, for example, SCOS. So we can find another ontology that fits neatly with it, I think, and that might be the best solution.
Right, thanks very much, Phil. We have another question. Do you want to go ahead, please?
Yes, it's Stefania. Sorry for the noise in the background. I have a sick baby at home. I just wanted to say thank you. I mean, this is great. As Arcadia funded projects, actually, one of our main mandates is to monitor what is happening to sites. And we've been starting to think about a possible monitoring resource model. And I really like the idea, by the way, of having it as a separate resource model, because that really allows you to play around with space, but also with time. And one of the challenges that we have is that obviously we need a resource model where we can rerun our assessment at different spans of time. So obviously having it separate and not necessarily linked with the sites is useful, because you can run these analyses separately without having to interact with each single site and changing those records. So I think that concept is particularly useful. Nevertheless, I have to say that we have in fact kept the threat and hazards nodes into the so-called heritage or site resource model, because in that manner we can record old records, basically, you know, legacy data that has been attached specifically to the site, for which we don't really know the spatial footprint. So I think having a dual system probably that uses the same terminology but is constructed at site level versus a separate resource model for, you know, generic hazards would still be valid. So I don't think one excludes the other.
No.
And thank you so much, because I mean, we are really excited to see that other groups are starting to develop this. And if I may, it would be fantastic to hear from you again, and perhaps to see who else is interested in developing this, because perhaps we could join efforts into trying to construct a resource model that looks at hazards, and as others said, not necessarily only climate, but see how to integrate other types of hazards and threats. Thank you so much. Sorry, it was a comment more than a question.
Thank you for that. That's interesting. Any more questions or observations from anybody? I think this is something we definitely would like to come back to again, because I think this has you know, applications for Arches generally, but obviously, you know, as a Arches or HER user, you know, I'm very keen on this as well.
Yeah, I mean,
right.
What Stefania was saying about working in collaboration, I think that's obviously the sensible approach. I mean, I'm not just going to go, oh, here's a model, suck it. That's yours. That's what you're going to deal with. It makes sense that, you know, those people who are looking at this, whether it be climate or other threats and hazards, yeah, we have separate models for each, I think, rather than just having a generic one, because there are different things that you need to record, for example. But yeah, working together, and certainly I'll reach out to you, Stefania, because finding out what's already been done is always helpful when it comes to modelling. So
if we suggest that if you have an interest in this, or have been working on something similar, perhaps if you could get in contact with both Helen and Phil, and then perhaps maybe you almost set up like a mini group just to take that forward. Might be an idea. Thanks very much. Right, our last presentation. We're rattling through, so there's plenty of time, Phil, for you to give us the full works. Phil from Flax and Teal is going to be talking to us on Archie's programmable framework for rules and permissions for users. Thank you. Over to you, Phil.
Thank you very much. Yes, I was trying to find the most exciting title I could think of to really get everybody ready for what's to come here. So the first caveat, thank you very much for an invitation, and really just to emphasize, everything here is work in progress. I'm going to have a little bit of a roadmap at the end. I'm very keen on feedback, and I think one of the things that we're quite conscious is that there's no point in us going and building something that's useful for one project. So really, if there are thoughts about how limitations that you see, or where there are features that would be absolutely required for you to adopt it, then those are the kind of things we'd love to hear. So I'm going to try and screen share here. I am going to try a live demo. I rather bravely or foolishly decided to try and upgrade the images to the latest arches in the last day, so my live demo may or may not be successful. That's mine, as everyone has to caveat. But I've got screenshots, so at least you'll see something here. Okay, let me see if I can get this. That looks hopefully correct. Okay. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes, all good.
Great, thanks, Helen. Okay, so hierarchical permissions. This is a simpler title, but to try and make this quite concrete, the idea is that we have hit some limitations with how Arches currently handles roles and permissions, and now in a couple of projects. So in the simplest example, as people are aware, you can add users to groups, and that will control their permissions. Sometimes, though, we want to do more general things. For example, this user story, we have an administrator in a particular regional office, let's say, and they should only have access to records, at least to edit records that are relevant to that office's remit. So this could be geographical, it could be administrative, it could be to do with organizational structure, and it could be to do with job role, it could be to do with grade, and that gives us a lot of different dimensions where we may wish to group people and provide logic based on that. Now, that can be done with managing resources individually and managing groups individually, but as I'm sure some of you have discovered, if you have different ways that you want to group people and then manage the access to resources, there could be a lot of manual work in maintaining that. And of course, when you're talking about permissions, having scope for accidental access and things like that is obviously a risk you want to minimize. And in particular, a lot of it has to be done currently through the Django interface rather than through Arch's front end. Maybe important to note as well that everything I talk about here is doesn't assume that everything is closed. So you may wish to also have public facing records, and none of this limits that possibility. It simply allows you to provide more specific permissions, and to do that in a way that maybe depends on your specific project rather than being generic to Arches. So The first step with that is that we need to have a way, if we want to try and do things in the Arches front end, and particularly if users, administrative users, other users are familiar with the Arches front end, that we then need to be able to link users, actual logging in users, to the resource models they can access. And so we need to link them to a resource a resource model that represents them. Now, we have used, for the purposes of this, we have used the person resource model in Arches HER, and we therefore have to link users to that so that each user can have a person model or a person resource that represents them. And then by managing that person resource by proxy, we manage that user. So other use cases for this. So this involves creating a user type. So as most of you know, in a resource model, there are quite a number of types available, basic types and complex types for attributes. And this adds effectively a user. What does that mean? Well, in this case, apologies to Jana for using this example, I have got under user account details, I have I've got a node representing an actual user that's in the system. So this is right now quite simple. If a user is present, here I've got Ash instead. Ash has their email address appearing and their user ID appearing. Important to note, this is not linked by the email. So if Ash changes their email, then this link survives. And if you go into your person report and have a look around, you'll see that this field is updated. But it means that we can now say that somehow, on some fundamental level, managing the Ash person can set permissions for the Ash user. How do we actually achieve that? I'm going to hopefully demo this at the end and we'll see if it works. But if we go onto the user account and there isn't currently a user, we can copy a sign up link. And there's a link here to do that, click that, and then you can send that to a person. They can sign themselves up, they can enter their data and their password and so forth. And as soon as their account's created, they're already assigned to a person. There are more things we need to do in this workflow to make it fully production ready, but that's just gets us a start. We can also see then in the normal edit interface that we have user accounts. In this case, it's blank, but will appear. So what we want to do is make that a little bit more functional. But for now, we've got a card and a widget that will do it. Okay, so assuming then that we have users attached to persons, we'll come back to the fact that a person is only exists in Arches HER, but how do we then turn that into something that allows that person to manage other resources? So our first approach to this has been to create a group management plugin, and that involves adding two resources. We've taken them essentially from Arches for Science and added them to our fork of Arches HER, and they group will only apply to persons, and set will apply to any models, which can include persons as well. Critically, they also are hierarchical. So if I have, let's say, an England group, it could have a Yorkshire subgroup. And similarly for sets, if I have a whole museum collection set, or a whole museum set, I can have a collection within that. That is a subset. That then means if I provide permissions to the top set, that cascades down. Now, why is that useful? Because I can now manage those subsets individually, and I don't have to sit mapping each permission individually from each user to that or each group to that. So let me see. So yes, and for anyone who's familiar with the back end of how Django is currently doing this in Arches, it's with Django Guardian, for those who are on the development side. It's essentially doing something similar, but with all the extra joy that having Arches ontology functionality brings. So, for example, having typed relationships. This then means we get to have a UI, which is fun because most people who've seen me present at any of these before have noticed that I seem to mostly demo code. I think I probably would have been banned from demoing again if that was the case. And here we have nothing too exciting so far. We have a group in the normal resource editor, and we can, as you can see, we've got members. We can add one or more persons to that. We've got a group name, and we can, in particular, we can pick a source, and that source is then the next level of a parent. On the flip side, we then can add some of these sets I mentioned. Those could be, for example, a museum collection or something like that. And then we can provide this action. We need to build or provide the user a way of managing the concepts that are allowed in there, perhaps just through the RDM. And that then means that anybody in the Flax and Teal team automatically has access to anything that's in the global set. And that particular access is now of type agent. So that could be read, it could be write, it could be something more complicated, and maybe agent allows us to do something more specific. I don't know, edit certain fields or something. Next is the sets. Similarly to the groups, we have members. Now the members are actual, are other types of resources. We also have nesting. So as I mentioned, it could be hierarchical. So you could have a, for example, let's say a geographic area that's within a certain remit, and then within that you might have a particular site that contains, we're talking about, let's say, monuments. You might have a site that contains multiple monuments that you want to manage together. We can also now display some of these. We're experimenting a bit with this, but and you'll recognize, some of you, those are we are combining the existing rules as well, but that we can say, okay, are you a direct member, or is it something you can directly access, or is it because you're a member of some group that has access? And also, again, we're building this out, but what types of permissions do you get, and how many resources can you actually work on? So that's partially a bit of a sense check to allow you to say, okay, well, I'm allowed to change 100,000 resources, maybe something's wrong. Now, what does groups management look like? Conveniently, and with thanks to all of the folks who worked on the related resources, we've been able to essentially grab the Cytoscape widget from there and do some fun things with that. This is the hierarchy. Apologies to Flax and Teal team who've been co-opted because I didn't have time to build another graph. Here we have a global group, which always exists, and within that we can have one or more sub-teams. And this is the same group hierarchy you've seen, and the members displayed visually. Also, you'll see on the right, we can use this to explore and jump in to edit each of those modules, or look at what types of relationships, and those have the correct side out labels. And you can see I was less inventive when it got to the sets. Here's a set of sets. And then permissions, we can look at the more complicated relationships. So here we ignore the individuals, but we look at how the groups relate together. So we say, okay, in this case, I've set the front-end developers to have permissions on Subbit, and the Coral team as a whole to have permissions on the global set. In this case, it means anybody who's added to the Coral team will be able to access essentially everything in that chain. The front-end developers will only be able to access Subbit and down. So going to try and demo this because it's been going so well so far. All the screenshots have turned up correctly. Just to check, am I okay for time if anyone wants to comment just before I... No one's complaining, that's good.
No, you're fine.
Good, thanks, Helen. Okay, so I'm going to switch screens here. Like I say, we've just done an upgrade of this, so please bear with me. Separate note, if anyone's interested, we've also, I don't know if any other developers have hit the Postgres apt repositories disappearing issue yet when dealing with Docker containers, but we've done a move to a more recent version of Django and Ubuntu 22.04. So it's actually not been too bad, but there has been some knock-ons. Okay. Now normal service resumed. Okay, so here's a resource manager. That'll look familiar to some of you, hopefully. You'll see down here set and group have been added. And I'm going to try adding a person. Currently, I'm logged in as admin just to keep life easy. Okay, so my name is Weir. What is my title? I'm not going to worry about that. Okay, great. So now I have a person. Right now, I need to go to the port to get the user account. But actually, let me do this. Make it clearer. So let's suppose that I've added a bunch of people automatically or whatever way I wanted to do it. And now Phil Weir comes along and I need to give them a password. And this is going nice and slowly. There we go. Thank you. So it's me here. I go into Phil and I say, okay, hey Phil, why don't you log into Arches? It'll be fun. There we go. So I click copy sign up link for this person. I'm going to log out of this. So I can now pretend to be myself. And I can email myself that link, for example. Now that I've come along, I can say, I want to be Phil.Weir. I want the browser to work. That's what I really want. There we go. And Phil.Weir at example.com. And some made up password that's going to pass. He hopes. Go. And that didn't quite work. But let's go on because I have a feeling that that will have still let me enter. So let me see. Hopefully, if I go back in, and now going back in as the admin, hopefully that will have been enough that I have signed up. Okay, that's a good sign. That's not such a good sign. Let's try that again. Okay, great. There we go. So now, despite everything, my user account is now associated with this person. So as the administrator, I can now go back and I can, or I could previously, which wouldn't have much actual use. I can now say, okay, let's add Phil to the Coral team. So I'm going to go into the Coral team group. And I'm going to add Phil. And save that. And now you should be able to see that I am in the list. Here we are. So in principle, that should give me permissions. I'm not going to keep going in this, but that should give me permissions to these three groups, my user when I log in, with the type agent, I think, wasn't it? Want to try and get a little bit more display of that here, but we'll come back to that. So that's essentially the management interface. Similarly, as you can imagine, I can remove myself, I can switch myself between groups, I can be a member of multiple groups, that's fine as well. And I'm going to see if I can show that, just to prove it, because people are always skeptical when I say that. I don't know why. Okay, go back into myself. Actually, sorry, I should do that for the group, shouldn't I? Okay, and that's Carl team. Oh yes, front-end developers. So I'm going to add myself to the front-end developers group because look at all this exciting front-end. Okay. So now I'm a member of two groups. Slightly redundant as the second group isn't going to give me access to anything more, but it hopefully will illustrate. So if I now, in fact, I think I can just refresh it this way. That work? No, it doesn't. Hopefully. Let's find out. I did save that. Yes, I did save that. Okay, well, that'll be why people don't believe me. I thought that demo was going moderately well there. Let's see if I really did get that wrong. Yes, I definitely remember. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm just being daft. There we go. You can't see it because it's hidden behind the other ones. That's fine. There we go. So we can now see that I am in the graph a member of both groups. So I will get permissions of both groups. So that's could have gone worse. So let me return. Oops. No. Never read that. Hold on. There we go. Just template. Yes. Okay, so I will keep this brief, but a couple of technical notes, because I know there's a couple of folks in the call that might be interested. There is a GitHub discussion. There are some changes required to core arches to use this, but really importantly, the changes to core arches are things that abstract the permissions framework rather than implement ours. So where currently Arches core requires Django Guardian to do all its permissions, we've got an example PR that's currently in discussion on that PR. I think seems to be enthusiasm about the direction, but very keen to get a diversity of opinion on it. But essentially what that would do is allow individual projects to override, or not to override, but to extend the permissions in the same way that they do everything else, views and so forth. And that's necessary because right now, as you can see, we need to use a person model. That could be any other model. Arches for Science, for example, could have its own one that does it differently. And therefore, we need to code the logic into the model, into the actual project, to say how you decide whether a user can do something, or person in this case. We also are using our work in progress backend tool, the resource model wrappers, which for those of you who've done web development, allows you to do kind of ASP.NET or Laravel or so forth style database lookups, which makes logic a lot easier to write in Python. Another question that I think is open is how can we make group management a mix-in? Because I could imagine that people might want to use this with a range of different packages. So Arches HER being one example. For anyone who's interested in how we're doing this hierarchical type thing, we're trying to use Caspin, which allows very rapid in-memory calculation of dependency permission trees. That is quite a technical point, but if anyone's interested, feel free to look it up. Happy to take questions on that. And finally, which I guess is the critical question, short term, we are planning to tidy up some of the errors you saw there and test this within the next week or two with a small number of real users. We are in the next, over the next 6 months, this is something that we need to be able to do because we do have complex permission requirements on our own projects, our own client projects. And all of this has been developed in the open. Please do bear in mind that it would be good to align with us as we get to beta and final release on it. Make sure you're using the correct version and that it's sufficiently stable for your purposes. Long term, and by that I mean over 6 months away, which software development seems like long term. Trying to work out how we can pull in multiple packages. That's something I know other people have been talking about, and I've had some conversations about. So if people are interested in that, that would be a discussion we'd really like to take forward, particularly with folks outside UK as well. And what could this also allow? Linking up with big reveal, things like Active Directory, because we can potentially import permissions models from other places. So that's where we are on permissions, and hopefully that's given you a flavour of why we're doing what we're doing, as opposed to some of the theoretical discussions we've had. And I am happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Phil. That was really interesting. It's certainly something I can see being useful for Arches, for HERs. As an HER manager, one of the things that I want to encourage is volunteers. If we are very successful in getting volunteers, that's a lot of work for us to manage. Yeah, if we can set up sub administrators, like trusted hire volunteers to do some of the admin work, that would be good. Also, having played around with the back end of Django a bit myself as a local administrator, something that's front end is certainly more friendly for those of my colleagues who don't have a lot of development or technical expertise. So yes, I think that's really interesting. I think we have a question. Chantel, would you like to go ahead with your question, please?
Hi. Thanks, Phil. That was all really, really interesting. Just so I can get my head around it, I'm not sure if I've missed the information, but which version of Arches is this being developed against? Is it 7.5?
Yeah. So as of 24 hours ago, yes. Yeah, we've been working. Basically, we're trying to track the release of 7.5. So it's been originally 7. I think we started this possibly 7.3 and then brought it through 7.4 into 7.5. We haven't really focused on backwards compatibility, but I'd say, bearing in mind that we've had to use this over a couple of versions, the proof of concepting at least, we are not expecting it to be too hard to backport if needed.
Okay.
At least to the 7 series.
Right. Is there sort of anything that's specifically in the 7 series that that this requires? Because we'll have one version of our instances of Arches that's at 6.2. I mean, we're going to upgrade the one that's at 6.1.
Good question. Off the top of my head, I don't think so. I mean, I think there's certainly, because there's changes to core arches, there would definitely be something that would need to be merged as a patch or a fork onto the 6 series. Someone else might be able to correct me, but I don't think that there was a massive change to the permissions frameworks from 6 to 7. And most of the other stuff we're using is kind of probably where there might be minor issues that could probably be fixable relatively easily, would be around maybe some of the resource model namings and things like the language support and stuff like that. But I think those are all relatively minor things. In terms of actual real functionality we're leveraging in Arches, there's actually very little, because what we're effectively doing is saying, can we swap Django Guardian as opposed to can we swap parts of Arches?
Yeah.
It shouldn't be too bad. But yeah, happy to have a discussion on that if it would be useful.
Okay, brilliant. Cheers, Phil.
Right.
Yes, we have a next question, please.
Yes, Phil, thanks for this. Sorry, I missed the beginning. I had to send a message and missed the beginning part of your presentation, and I'm not sure if you've explained this, but just for me to make sure that I understood correctly, because I never worked with the permission side of Arches, that how you assign permit. Is this a work that you've been, or what prompted to do what you're doing is to give permission to people to work on specific resource models? So if I have an editor kind of right, just to be able to edit 1 or 2 resource model and not everything, as opposed to what you can do with the permissions thing that you can do within Arches, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that everything that we are doing, you could do manually. Right now, it just would mean a lot of handwork, which for 1 or 2 resources is fine. But if you've got, let's say, 10,000 resources and somebody should have access to 2,000 of them, then at the moment, that's kind of tricky, I think, personally.
Yes.
Someone's trying to walk around, I missed. But what we are doing here is also saying, on one hand, if we can manage that in a group or hierarchy of groups on the resource side, and maybe there's multiple ways you want to group these things, and I think that's the challenge, to be honest, is that it's quite hard to say it's exactly these 2,000. You might want to assign permissions based on different things at the same time, like place or administrative remit or things. And then on the other side, tying to individuals, obviously that's challenging because people move on. Effectively what we're trying to do is make this a group to group relationship. And then once you start thinking about the use cases for that, very quickly you have to say, okay, we need some sort of hierarchical way of doing that, not just groups of people. It needs to be groups potentially layered.
And this is something that can be also be done kind of based on geographically, or like provinces or areas that people from one, or would that be a difference?
You can't do that now. Right now, we right now what we're doing is doing this manually. So you add things to a group manually. However, we've also been working on graph-based API, as some of you might have, I think I presented in the last one of these. So you could potentially, in fact, not could potentially, we will have to auto group these and say, okay, these ones are all within the same area, therefore we're going to sign the same tag, or they share a name or something, but we can do it over the, let's say in Python, in something like Jupyter for those who use it, and then push that group definition up to arches, and now all those things are grouped. But one of the more interesting use cases, we haven't done this with arches, but we've done it in different projects with Caspian, is, for example, auto grouping. Now, I don't want to kind of suggest that certainly we've got higher priorities in the next 6 months. I think some of our clients might say, Phil, why are you doing that? And I say we're going to start doing this right now. But let's say, for example, you've got assets that are mobile. And this kind of opens up an interesting class of things like asset tracking. Then we have done this before with Caspian. You can say, okay, well, we're getting live GPS data. Let's do the group reassignments based off updates to GPS, for example. Obviously, you can do that with static assets as well, but it's less exciting. So if, for example, you have a piece of equipment that is turning up somewhere else, that it automatically gets moved to that group, all of your permissions stay the same, but that creates an interesting use case where, for example, the people who've got access to your equipment record are the people where their equipment physically is right now. And this would be most of the work to enable that. But yeah, I think that's probably not such a relevant use case for most people here. But it would also allow you to do things like, say, here's a geofence. So within this area, I want all assets that appear in this area to become part of this group. That would require implementing the logic for that, but yeah, again, this would probably be 90% of the way there.
Thanks, Phil. This is very helpful.
Yes, thank you. I think that's quite an interesting point about spatially being able to give permissions. I mean, certainly I can see potential applications for that for ArchHER, certainly in London with the boroughs, if we're engaging more with conservation officers there, and obviously there's a planning issue there. If we could, excuse me, be able to give them permissions for planning records within their borough, that would be quite a useful thing to have, I think, in the way of giving them more access. Excuse me. Are there any more questions for Phil? Or does anybody have any observations or thoughts for the other presentations that we've had from Samuel and Helen this morning? Yes, Nina.
Oh, hi. It looks really interesting that the permissions work. I was just wondering, is it based specifically on a table level permission, or is it more granular than that and it could be fields within a table?
Great question. It can be, but you probably have to do some Python at this point. So what we currently have is a way of overriding essentially the permissions functions, and we have the same functions that currently exist in Arches. So it would be possible to basically do the same thing as is currently in Arches, but using this framework instead. It's just not something we've looked at yet. We may have to quite shortly, but yeah, it's
Okay.
possible.
That sounds interesting. And what about the idea that you could have different permissions? So, you know, some users might be able to edit, and some users may be able to add and edit and delete, and having that more sort of granular thing, because that works really well with volunteers. So they could edit something, but they couldn't delete it.
Yes, exactly. And that's that permission link from a group to a set in the example allows you to write. I mean, right now we're using kind of artificial list just to kind of test things, but the idea is that you can add different concepts. Those concepts would, for example, include read, write, edit, but potentially more exotic things. And then that becomes something that could itself be managed through the interface. What we need to work out how to do is to tie the meaning of those permissions to actual actions in the interface. So the simplest is to keep read, write, execute at the moment. But yes, the idea is that we can not only do that, but potentially, as I say, more exotic things. So you, ideally, you would be able to do things like, okay, this permission confers the right to edit a certain subset of fields, for example, or to create provision edits or something like that.
Okay, that's really interesting. Thank you.
Right. Oh, yes, Matt.
Hi, sorry. So this might just be based on my not knowing much about Archers for Science. You said that there are some aspects that you took from that. Did that basically include the element where someone's user account is directly linked to the person graph, or is that something you designed yourself?
That we had to do ourselves. The only thing we really took from Archers for Science was the set, which I think in Archers for Science is collection stroke set, and group resource models, just to save creating our own.
Cool, that's good. I saw that bit at the beginning of the presentation, and then my mind went onto something completely different where that same functionality would be really useful, which is one of the other things that's been slightly irritating for us in terms of the kind of your user account and your person record being two completely separate and divorced things, is that you can't search the audit trail through the front end. Could that functionality be used to make that a possibility, or like could there be a function where once it recognized that your user account had been used to edit a record, it automatically added you as an associated person to the record that then made you searchable?
Yes.
Sorry,
yeah, that's
I know
actually
it's
really,
not really on the same topic, but
no, that's great, because I think that was the thing I even noted in the slide. I feel like there's other use cases, and I guess we've been so focused on the permissions framework, we haven't really thought, but those are two really good examples. Yes, now we've also got a little bit of work that we've had to do, and this is kind of how we've worked around this in previous projects, where we can hook on save, in fact, hook basically lifecycle events for a resource, and then add Python callbacks for those. So putting those together, yes, that would actually be reasonably straight. Certainly the associated person, I think, should be reasonably straightforward with what we have now, because we could do an on-save, okay, on-save, which is the user, get the person for the user, and then attach them as associated record. Essentially, we've been doing this with in one particular bit of Arch's work we did a year ago. We did this with projects, so every resource had an associated project, and then when it was saved, we basically made sure that it was associated to the project, so it'd be very similar. Probably we use that code. So yeah, happy if you want to reach out, happy to follow up on that, because I think that's quite a immediately doable one.
That's brilliant. Cheers.
Well, I say immediately, but with slightly proof of concept codes.
Yeah. No, well, definitely.
That's what I passed over to get to production.
There's something we could have a chat about and see if we can get some. That would be amazing if we could. Yeah, because currently we're sort of mucking about with a dashboard and a Power BI dashboard to try and search like when our advisors have been doing consultations and stuff. So having something that's searchable through the find standard window, that would be amazing.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good point, Matt. Very good point.
Yeah, we might need that too, actually, now you mention it.
Yeah. Any more questions? Or I don't know if anybody. Oh, Phil,
Excuse me. Getting over bronchitis.
if you can make it.
Not necessarily a question, but just from following what Matt was saying about Artists for Science there, I think maybe we should try and get somebody who knows what they're talking about when it comes to Artists for Science to actually give us a demo of art. You know, I've never seen it demoed yet, and so it would be nice to actually get some get eyes on it, maybe at the next user group meeting.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I mean, we've used it as a basis for a project before, where it was quite useful, but the actual use case was quite different to the intended one. So I'd also be really interested in that. Just, I suppose, maybe as a segue, I don't know how many people have been following or are planning to go to the US event, but I know that's still a while away. It's in March. But I think there's a few things I know they're looking for topics to put on the table for that too. Hopefully this will be more short-term one, but it might be more of an Artists for Science deep dive, even hybrid.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that's a good point. I think on the Getty pages, I think there is a video of somebody giving a talk about Artists for Science. I seem to remember seeing it a while ago, but I think it's quite high level.
Yeah.
Without going into too much detail, I think you're right. We do need somebody who's actually used it really in anger, because I think there's things there in Artists for Science that would be good to pull into later versions for Arches for HERs.
And now we're sort of like, we're sort of blurring the lines with things like climate change and potentially other scientific data that we'd be wanting to record. Some of the sort of like the funky widgets that I know that they've got in
deposit
science
modeling.
Yeah, exactly. It would be, rather than reinvent the wheel, see if we can nick stuff from science.
Well, tagging images, there's, for change over time would be, I think, very useful for advisors and conservation officers and that sort of thing. So yes, I've made a note of that. I'll have a word and see what we can do about getting an Arches for Science demo. I'm not sure if there are any more questions, but I was just going to throw it open to anybody, with projects, if there's any updates they want to give the group, or any thoughts for future discussion for later meetings as well. And obviously Arches for Science, I think would be good for the next meeting, but are there any other things that people would like to see or discuss?
No, that's it then.
I mean, that's it, job done. Well, just disband the group. I feel.
I was just waiting until you thought you were free there. One thing I was just actually a couple of us, I'd seen Taylor's on the call as well here from our side. A couple of us have been working on some of the containers. I know this is maybe a bit more of a developer topic in general, but I know some people have been following along what we've been doing on that. If anybody, and Owen, thank you. If anybody has interest in this, happy to follow up. But we reckon we're pretty close to declarative Arches instances, where we can do a pull request on GitHub to our infrastructure repo when an Arches instance appears. Now, that's technology terms. That's involving Flux CD, Kubernetes. We've now got kind of a container toolkit, and we want to really try and align this with some of the work that's been going on, particularly Eric's work, but it's not yet. And I'm conscious that I believe the historical team have also been doing quite a bit of work in the space, so really would be keen to align before we go too much further, but based on the work we've done last year. So yeah. Nina?
I just wanted to know if there was any update on the reference data manager.
Oh, yeah, I suppose I can talk to that.
Okay.
We're currently working on the models for the reference data manager, and because it's a whole rethink from the CRM point of view, it's a lot more complicated than it probably needs to be at the moment. But yeah, so we're kind of still on track for where we thought we'd be, which is probably back end of the year, back end of next year. But yeah, it's one of those things where we're looking at a lot of backwards compatibility issues at the moment. So how you'll be able to transition from a current instance through to the new RDM. So we're making sure that basically it's not going to be like pulling teeth, hopefully.
Sounds good.
But yeah, it's a bit of a mind meld situation every time we speak about it at the moment. So it's a bit complicated.
Okay, thank you. It'd be good if there's something to report at the next meeting. It'd be good to have a sort of fuller.
Yeah,
maybe.
Those of you who are in the UK who care about sort of like vocabularies coming from fish, I will be talking vaguely on this at HER Forum about how we'll be transitioning from providing 5 CSV tables to the new RDM and how that's going to impact HERs. But other than that, no, I can't really. And we may have something to show. We've got kind of wireframes of how the RDM might work, but I suppose the big difference will be that the enhanced RDM as it is being built for people like me, whose job is to build vocabularies. It's not being built for Archie's users to manage word lists, if that makes sense. So at the moment, the current RDM allows user of Archie's for HER to ingest vocabularies, create their own little vocabularies, and then make them available in their instance. Whereas the enhanced RDM project is more to do with people like, as I said, people like me who are editors of thesauri. That's the main job. So the Getty Vocab program, we've got meetings next month in LA with the Getty Vocab program, who are potentially going to be coming on board to use the enhanced RDM as well. So it's more to do with a few people who will be interested in doing that. But it will have an impact on how the current RDM works and how you'll be able to interact with. If you think of the enhanced RDM as a sort of like a centralized vocabulary hub that you can subscribe to. So you'll be able to go, oh, I like the latest version of that vocabulary, which is in the hub. And then you'll be able to pull that into your instance and use it. And you'll be able to feed back candidate terms into that hub. So how much it's going to affect the back end of an Archers for HER instance or an Archers for Science instance is slightly unclear at the moment, shall we say, and is something that the project team are wrestling with as to how much of it is for 6 people in the world who do this kind of thing and how much of it should be for everyone. So we're currently working through that process of trying to work out how to make sure that the RDM as it currently sits within Archers for HER is enhanced and improved and is able to talk to external instances, and how much of it is important for editors of vocabularies to be able to do their work and make their work available.
Okay, thank you.
Right, next question. Zadie?
Yes, it's just to say that one of the works that we've been doing with Arcadia Arches team with the 5-6 different 6 or 7, I guess, projects in the past few meetings that we had was the thinking kind of going back of what is archaeology, kind of thinking about archaeology. How do we each of the projects define archaeological sites with the boundary, rigid boundary or fuzzy boundary relations with features and off-site also materials that we find in the survey and also using remote sensing, and how is best or better to record sites having all these new thoughts in mind. So if if you are interested, we can in the new year have a short presentation on our talks and questions, and kind of our we're working on producing a paper on it as well, and then also to hear if any of you also, especially with the HERs, because we know that having boundaries and defining where is the extent of sites is important for the heritage management, but then it has some problems and issues working in landscape archaeology and how and why we define these boundaries. So that could be a subject. If you're interested, we can include it in one of our meetings.
Have you been involved with the geospatial partnership at all? Because there's a UK geospatial partnership, and then new terms of reference being developed. It's being led by Historic England.
No, we have not. I don't think Rebecca and Stefania are here as well. I don't know if I don't think so. No.
No, we haven't. If you could send us the contact, that'll be great. I mean,
the contact, yes.
Yeah, I guess what we're doing and what may be of interest to everybody else is that we all work outside of the UK, mainly in the global south. So it may be interesting to see how differently we do things elsewhere and what we can learn, obviously, from where we are.
Okay, I'll find some contact details for you.
No, that's very interesting. I think, you know, one of the perennial problems of an HER manager officer is, you know, how do you spatially record things you don't actually know how big they are or actually where they are. I mean, back in the day, it was in the bottom left-hand corner of you know, the grid, which causes problems in itself when you get 500 records on the corner of a map square. I think it's something that has been discussed for a number of years now without anybody really coming up with a solution, although I seem to remember something that the in Scotland they were producing some guidance on polygonization, but yeah, there's nothing definitive. But yes, I think, you know, any discussion of that would be welcome, just purely to get some more ideas and perhaps a different perspective. Yeah. Right. So yeah, I mean, I'd love to take up your offer of, you know, presentation at the next meeting. That would be super. Thank you very much on the work that you're doing. Also, you know, I'll just put out a call if anybody else would like to give a presentation. You know, please let me know. The more we have, the more discussion we can build up. Because if you don't, you only get me banging on about arches for HERs again. So, you know, if you want, I'll do it, but you know, give other people a chance to shine and be in the spotlight for a bit. So yes, I do think it just leaves me to thank all our presenters, Samuel, Helen, and Phil, for some, you know, really good, interesting presentations, which you know, it's got me thinking about some ideas. So thank you very much, and just to thank you all for attending, because obviously without you, there would be no meetings or group. So I'll yes, so that'd be interesting. Yeah, Phil. No, that'd be good. So yeah, so I'll just leaves me to say thank you very much again. I'm easily distracted, you know, a biscuit, cup of tea, and I'm gone for hours really. So don't worry about that. So yes, so thanks everybody. I'll try and sort out this presentation. I'll probably have to have a word with my friends in the Getty about knocking this into a nice shape. But once it is, I'll send out a link to everybody, but also I'll put it up on the sorry, not the Arches community forum. But yeah, so plea for any presentations. Perhaps in the new year, sometime in February, Jana and myself will send out some invites for some dates, and we can meet again in the spring. So thank you very much and take care, everybody. See you again soon.